Quichotte is Rushdie at his satirical best, an exquisite metaphor for the world we live in and a deliciously funny Don Quixote for modern times. It has gathered rave reviews from Entertainment Weekly, The Associated Press, The Guardian, and Time, to name a few. In 1993, his novel Midnight's Children was judged to be the Booker of Bookers, the best novel to have won the Booker Prize in its first 25 years. And in June 2007, he received the knighthood from Queen Elizabeth. But he's best known for his book, The Satanic Verses, which is only one of the many novels he has written to critical acclaim, including The Moor's Last Sigh, Grimace, The Ground Beneath Her Feet, and The Enchantress of Florence. A few of his non-fiction works include The Jaguar Smile, Imaginary Homelands, and the Vintage Book of Short Stories. A Fellow of the Royal Society Literature, a Commandeur d'Art et des Lettres, and winner of the European Union Top Prize for Literature, were truly delighted at the Miami Book Fair to present Sir Salman Rushdie. In conversation with him will be Mitchell Kaplan, a man who needs no introduction here in his second home. For some of you that are not from Miami or new to Miami, Mitchell is the owner of the independent bookstore Books and Books with venues all around the city. And he's also the co-founder of the Miami Book Fair alongside our president emeritus, Dr. Eduardo Padron. So with further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Sir Salman Rushdie and Mitch Kaplan. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Natalia. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving the commercial for the book fair. You know, you all have to be there. You know that, don't you? And in fact, when I was talking to Salman before, he said this is the first time he's been here, but not at the book fair. And the reason why he's not going to be at the book fair is because
the book's coming out in Germany at that time, and I have to be in Germany. But I really miss it. I mean, I really love coming to the book fair. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, it's the first time I've been here without all those stalls outside, etc. So, yeah, I got lost because I didn't know, I only know it when it's crowded. Anyway, yeah, it's great to be here.
Well, Salman, we want to thank you for being here for this book. And I also want to congratulate you on the Booker. Quichotte has been nominated as it's part of the short list of the Booker Awards, which will also change his travel schedule a little bit as well, right?
Well, I have to, yeah, I mean, I have to be there. It's the actual award ceremony, I think, is on October the 14th.
Right.
But now, you know, the Booker has become such a big deal that now they ask the shortlisted writers to come several days earlier because they arrange a series of group readings in different cities.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So like in Manchester, in the Cheltenham Festival, in the Royal Festival Hall in London, like the 3 days before the actual award ceremony. I think the only one who's not coming is Margaret Atwood.
Okay, well, we're going to be pulling for you.
I think she's a little busy right now.
Yes.
But anyway, she and I, you know, are very old friends, and I mean, I think we met in like 1982 or something, you know, and we've been sending each other mischievous messages about the Booker, you know, just sort of teasing each other about it. I said to her, the only writer in the world this year who does not need the Booker Prize is Margaret Atwood, because she's going to have this like Michelle Obama-sized success anyway. And I mean, she's going to sell 1 billion copies, whether she wins the prize or not. So, you know, never mind the Booker Prize, Peggy Atwood. You know, she wrote back to me, and she said, I think we're on the list representing the still ambulatory old poops. Anyway, so we're just going to go and have a nice evening.
Well, I'll be pulling for you, Salman. What I thought we would do is we're going to start off with Salman giving a bit of a reading from just the beginning of the book, so you get a sense of the flavor of what to expect from Quichotte. So, Salman, if you
I'll
want to
read,
do
yeah,
that.
I mean, reading the beginning is, you don't have to introduce it, because it's the beginning.
I'll hold that while you get it.
Just open the book. One of the things about the book is it has these very long Dickensian chapter titles. So I'm going to read you the chapter title as well. Chapter 1, Quichotte, an old man, falls in love, embarks on a quest, and becomes a father. That's just chapter 1. There once lived, at a series of temporary addresses across the United States of America, a traveling man of Indian origin, advancing years, and retreating mental powers, who, on account of his love for mindless television, had spent far too much of his life in the yellow light of tawdry motel rooms, watching in excess of it, and had suffered a peculiar form of brain damage as a result. He devoured morning shows, daytime shows, late-night talk shows, soaps, situation comedies, Lifetime movies, hospital dramas, police series, vampire and zombie serials, the dramas of housewives from Atlanta, New Jersey, Beverly Hills, and New York, the romances and quarrels of hotel fortune princesses and self-styled shahs, the cavortings of individuals made famous by nudities, the 15 minutes of fame accorded to young persons with large social media followings on account of their plastic surgery acquisition of a third breast, or their post-rib removal figures that mimicked the impossible shape of the Mattel company's Barbie doll, or even more simply, their ability to catch giant carp in picturesque settings, wearing only the tiniest of string bikinis, as well as singing competitions, cooking competitions, competitions for business propositions, competitions for business apprenticeship, competitions between remote-controlled monster vehicles, fashion competitions, competitions for the affections of both bachelors and bachelorettes, baseball games, basketball games, football games, wrestling bouts, kickboxing bouts, extreme sports programming, and of course, beauty contests. He did not watch hockey. For people of his ethnic persuasion and tropical youth, hockey, which in the USA was renamed field hockey, was a game played on grass. To play field hockey on ice was, in his opinion, the absurd equivalent of ice skating on a lawn.
That was wonderful. Gives you, yes. It gives you a sense of the humor that's in this book. And I have to tell you that I read this book literally in one sitting. I didn't sleep. It just captured me. It's the hardest book, I think, that I could ever try to summarize, so I won't try to do that. But it is so rich and so prescient, and what Salman has been able to do is capture our time. And I happen to know that you were writing this way before our time right now.
Yeah.
But you captured so much of what's so important today, right at the moment. But the question I have for you is, since you obviously, it's a nod to Don Quixote. So basically, where did it come from where you decided to bring Cervantes 400 years into the future?
You know, it was a strange kind of serendipitous thing that 4 or 5 years ago, I think it's 1915, was the double anniversary of Shakespeare and Cervantes. And so a lot of us going to book festivals, you know, were being asked to talk about these two giants, you know, and I had been asked to write something about them, about the two of them, comparing and contrasting the two of them. And I thought I'd better look at this book again, because I really hadn't read it since I was about 20. So I mean, like, almost half a century had passed since I had read Don Quixote. And what had happened in the meanwhile was a much better translation was available in English. You know, the Edith Grossman translation is a brilliant translation, and makes the book vivid and exciting and contemporary in a way that previous translations did not, you know, and so I actually enjoyed it enormously much more returning to it after all these years. And I had been thinking, long before I thought about Cervantes, I had been thinking of some kind of a road book. And I wasn't even sure that it would be fiction. In fact, I had this idea that maybe I'd write a travel book, in which I would like rent a car and drive across America and see what happened. And well, I even approached my then not quite 19-year-old son, now 18-year-old, I think he was at the time, he's 22 now. And I said, would he go with me? Because I thought it might be interesting to have a different generational perspective, as well as mine. And he said, yeah, he would be up for a road trip. And then, after a kind of comic pause, he said, but Dad, are you going to drive? And I was very insulted. I said, I've been driving since before you were born. What are you talking about? And he said, no, I'm not sure that you should drive. And so I said, well, how about if you drive? And he said, well, then it's fine. So we had sort of half planned out this road trip. And then I read, or picked up and reread Don Quixote. And immediately I thought, no, I want to make it up. I want to allow my imagination to do this journey and not just be limited by whatever happens or doesn't happen.
Explain the road trip aspect of it.
Well, what happens in the novel, at the beginning of the novel, you heard about this character who is a traveling salesman in pharmaceuticals. And when you first meet him, he's in a Red Roof Inn in Gallup, New Mexico, and about to be fired. But meanwhile, because of his obsession with television, which I read about, he's he's quotes fallen in love, unquotes, with a woman on TV who is a very famous daytime talk show host, maybe second only to Oprah Winfrey. And as they say these days, way out of his league. But that doesn't stop him. He decides he's in love. She's, by the way, she's called Miss Salma R., a name which is one letter away from mine, for some reason. And he decides that he's going to win her hand, and that involves getting in his Chevy Cruze and traveling across America to New York, where she is. But it's not only a physical journey, it's also a journey of the spirit, because he knows, or he tells himself, that in order to win the hand of the beloved, he has to prove himself to be worthy of her. And so he feels he has to undergo a sequence of personal trials, in order to reach the point at which he is worth winning her hand.
Well, and just as Cervantes satirized the culture of his time,
Yeah.
What happens through this road trip is that we see kind of what happens to him during this road trip.
I hope you see some kind of panorama of this country at this moment, and the thing that for me made the book work is that my main character, Quichotte, he's an absurd optimist. He's a kind of comical optimist where there is no reason for his optimism. I mean, such as there is no reason for him to believe that he's going to actually win the hand of this great lady. But he never loses faith. In fact, the only time he gets angry is when somebody says to him, maybe it's not going to work out. And, maybe after all this, she's going to look at you and she's going to go, not really. And at that point, he's enraged. And I thought to propel this optimistic, hopeful man across the landscape of America in this moment, which may not be the most optimistic moment in the history of the United States, that the friction, the tension, the engagement of those two things would be good.
Well, and what's interesting to me, what was really interesting to me is that, you didn't write this yesterday. So but how prescient it really is that you're taking Quichotte basically through, red America, through these little cities.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you put the population of each city
Yeah,
there.
I tell you where the population came from. Every time a town is mentioned in the book, whether it's a tiny little township or a big city, in parentheses I give the population. It becomes like a gag. And where it comes from is years ago, I read the diaries of Andy Warhol. And Andy Warhol in his diaries, every time he does anything, he tells you how much it costs.
Is that right?
So he says, took a cab uptown.
$4.93.
Yeah, $4.95 with tip. Went back down to CB's to see Lou. $7.95 with tip. And I thought, it's hilarious that he prices his whole life.
Right.
So I thought, I don't want to do money because he's got money, so I'll do this other gag of telling everybody wherever he arrives, you get told the population.
Well, and with Quichotte, you raise so many of the issues that we're going through right now. For instance, there are a lot of very upsetting scenes in the book that deal with immigration, for instance.
Of racism.
We should say that Quichotte
He's Indian American. He's Indian American. And so he's a brown-skinned man. And I suppose we have to talk about his son. He invents a son by magic.
Right.
He's a lonely man. He's never been married. He's always wanted a child.
And the son turns out to be a black and white son.
Initially.
Until he then becomes...
full color.
Full color.
He moves from analog to digital. and he's in a way more like Pinocchio than Sancho Panza.
Yes.
He's sort of invented by his father, and he wants to be a real live boy.
And they even talk to crickets.
There is a cricket. There's a cricket that speaks Italian.
I actually read this wondering what drugs he was on when he wrote this, to be very honest.
No, listen, it's very simple. If you can imagine a time before Walt Disney, there was a novel called Pinocchio.
True.
By Carlo Collodi, written in Italian. And in that novel, there is a talking cricket. The cricket is called Grillo Parlante, which means talking cricket. And so I thought, I'm going to have the original talking cricket and not the Disney bowler hat, top hat and umbrella version, but the Italian version. And my Italian is okay, but I wasn't so arrogant that I thought I could just write the Italian, So I got a friend of mine who Francesco Clemente, yes, the painter. Clemente. I said, would you just read the Italian and make sure that it's okay? And what I was proud about is he only found one grammatical error. But what he did, which was much more important, was to help me idiomatically. So he would say, yes, what you've said is correct Italian, but that's not what people would say. What people would say is this. And so I was able to improve the Italian with a little help. But I mean, the Italian is very clear from context, it's not like, and it's only like little phrases. But yes, there's a talking cricket.
Quichotte has
Quichotte has this sidekick who, and in the way that Quichotte is not like Don Quixote, because Don Quixote is melancholy, and my Quichotte is hopeful and smiling, In the same way, Sancho Panza, first of all, is an adult. Secondly, is incredibly real. He's very earthy and grounded, etc. Don Quixote has his head in the clouds, but Sancho Panza has his feet on the ground, and that's the nature of their relationship. My Sancho is an imagined teenager.
Yeah, he's a teenager trying to figure things out.
Trying to figure things out and desperate to be real.
Right.
So what happened, and which is what I mean, in a way, is what made me able to write the book, is that, yes, the Cervantes masterpiece is a starting point. But once I had my characters, I thought, well, these are my characters, they're not his characters. And I want them to go on my journey, not his journey. And so at that point I said, thank you very much, Cervantes, and now we'll just put your book over here, and we're going to go this way. And that's what happened. And this way was really to try and write some kind of panoramic novel about America, because the previous two novels that I wrote, almost entirely, like 95% took place in New York City. And I remember finishing The Golden House and saying to myself, okay, now you have to leave town. Now you can't stay in the 212 area code. You have to go. And so there was a genuine desire to say there's more to America.
And you do a very good job of it. You spend a lot of time in Atlanta, in Tulsa, in a bunch of other cities.
Yeah,
So
Atlanta I know pretty well because I taught at Emory as a visiting professor for 10 years. So I got to know, there's a substantial bit of the book that happens in Atlanta.
But we've left something out. Quichotte is created by somebody.
Yeah, there's a
so
second storyline.
There's a second storyline going on, and that is that there is a writer who is writing,
who was writing
person.
him. And it was completely, I didn't know it was going to happen.
I think this is the first time you've ever really written about writing.
Yeah. I kind of disapprove of it. I would read these books, and there's, as you know, more than one or two of them. A book in which a writer is writing a book about a writer who's writing a book, sometimes about a writer, And I would just think, stop it. Don't do that. And then I found myself doing it, quite surprisingly, because I had thought that what we've been talking about was the book, that there would be Quichotte and his Sancho, and they would go on this journey across America, and they would have all kinds of adventures, and they would be like in search of love, and that's the book, I thought. And then this other material started showing up. Completely, I really didn't know it was coming. And I wasn't sure what it was to begin with. Because what it is there's this writer who is a not very successful writer of spy novels.
Right.
And he's decided to, as a kind of last throw, to try and write something completely different. And then it turns out he's writing the other storyline. And then it turns out that the other storyline has a lot in common with events in his own life that he's trying to work out in the form of this fiction. And I really genuinely didn't know if that was a good idea or a bad idea.
Well, I think it's a good idea.
Well,
it was a fabulous idea.
Well, what I thought I would do is okay, now that it's showed up, I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to see where it takes me and what it gives me. But for a long time, I reserved the right with myself to take it all out and throw it away.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then I discovered it was too late for that, because the two storylines
the stories kind of merge.
grown together,
right.
And then I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. So it was one of those things that is kind of wonderful when it happens, when you discover the book you're writing in the act of writing it, and the book that you end up writing is rather different.
Is this very new for you? How do you normally plot your books out?
No, I've got much more instinctive as the years have gone by. I started out being an architecture person.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Midnight's Children, because the story of the central family is so engaged with or directly connected with historical events, that you actually had to make a map. You had to say, here's the history of India and Pakistan, and here's what's happening to the characters, and on this date this happens, and on that date that happens. And it would have been impossible to write the book if I hadn't made that plan. And then I had to stick with it. So that book was very, very carefully built architecturally, and what's happened since is I've got looser, and more willing to see what happens and then see if I like it. And I had this thing when I interviewed Toni Morrison, and she was talking about her novel Jazz, and saying that she kind of liked that approach to writing, that, that when a great jazz musician picks up his horn, he doesn't exactly know what's coming out of until he does it, and she said that she kind of liked that. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for Toni Morrison, it's good enough for me.
Well, and it does work so well in this
So
book.
I do think there is a thing. And also, you see, Indian classical music, by the way, sitar, the rag, etc., is also, like jazz, very improvisational. Yes, there's a structure, but within the structure, there's a great deal of room for the musician to improvise. And I've come to think of that as what I like. And more as the books have gone on, that's been more and more a way that has become natural to me.
So you're getting away from the structure and really allowing the book to sort of reveal itself.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I talked to Michael Ondaatje about this, because he does this, that he starts with very little. He starts with a germ, or maybe 2 or 3 germs, and he tries to see where they lead him. And he'll write, he'll go down a pathway and then think, I actually don't like that, I've got to go another way. And so he'll discover the book in the act of writing the book. And so, he takes like 7 or 8 years to write a novel. And when it comes out, it's like 200 pages long. And you think, what have you been doing with your time?
And then Michael will not forget, but he'll let a character just sort of disappear as well.
Exactly.
So it's not important to the story.
Yeah, so I'm not quite at that point, but I like the idea. I think that the way your mind works in the moment of the act of creation, your mind doesn't work like that the rest of the time. And in that moment, it can come up with things that you would never have thought of. And so you end up writing a book that you couldn't have thought of. And that I like. That you end up with a book that is not just the book you could have sat down and planned.
Well, it's clear that your mind, I almost thought of a lot of what I know it's not true, but it seemed like a lot of what you did was almost like automatic writing. I mean, you were bringing up things like Ionesco and Fellini and all these other things.
No, not automatic writing.
No, I know it's not.
But you see, things would happen, and then I would have to think, do I want this? And the Ionesco thing is, there's a chapter in the book in which Quichotte and his teenage kid, Sancho, arrive in this town in New Jersey called Beringer. There isn't a town in New Jersey called Beringer. But in this town, people are turning into mastodons, as they do. Some of them are the full mastodon, and some of them are kind of like half mastodons in green Baba the Elephant suits. And as far as I know, this is not taking place in New Jersey at the present time. But what it was about was that I suddenly remembered that when I was 19 years old at university, I was cast in a production of Ionesco's great play Rhinoceros, in which people turn into rhinoceroses. I mean, I wasn't the lead character. It's called Beringer, hence the name, or Béranger, hence the name of the town in New Jersey. I wasn't the lead character. I was just one of the townspeople turning into rhinoceroses. And because, it's written as a farce, so everybody's running on and off stage all the time. And I would have to run off stage, and a stagehand would stick a bit more rhinoceros on me, and I'd run back on stage. And I was 19 or something, and I really didn't understand the play. And I remember saying to the producer, what's this about? So what is all this? And he rather sweetly, gently, as if talking to a person of limited intelligence, said, Salman, it's about fascism.
Right.
It's about Nazism. What he's writing about is how you can be at a moment in a small town or in a society in which your neighbors suddenly become monsters. in which the people whose children were playing with your children the day before yesterday, suddenly they're so alien to you that you can't talk to them, you don't recognize them, and you find them alarming. That's what it's about.
And that is a subtext that runs through the whole novel.
Yeah, and I suddenly thought, maybe we're there again.
Right.
Maybe we're back in that place. And so this little chapter, which is in a way like it's deliberate on the road, they turn off the road and they have this experience. So it's a deliberately constructed like sidebar to the plot. But in many ways, I think it's the story of the book, that chapter. How we now live in a world in which we are alien to one another, and alarmed by one another.
Most definitely. And let's talk about some of the themes. I mean, to me, the theme of media and how media affects us is overarching in this book. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of, there's a book that I read years and years ago by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Oh. And the subtitle is Serious Discourse in the Age of Show Business. Yeah. And you get that sense of just this overwhelming effect that the media has on Quichotte.
That unreality has possessed us, and goes all the way to Washington.
Yeah, I mean, we see that this week, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, yes, the book has a lot of fun with like reality television and all that, but underneath the fun, I guess what it's trying to say is that if you live at a time, which I think we all live in which these boundaries between fact and fiction have become so blurred and problematic, that people find it actually difficult to distinguish between the real and the untrue, and that's a kind of dangerous situation for a society to be in, and
where the line is blurred.
Where the line is so blurred that you can't any longer, one man's truth is another man's lie.
Right.
And how do you deal with that world? How do you navigate that world? And that's the world that Quichotte and his Sancho have to navigate.
I was also struck by how much love had to do with so much of this book. Yeah. There's a line that you have in it where you say, human life is mostly unhappiness. The only antidote is love. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought there's a great poem that W.H. Auden wrote just before the outbreak of World War II. In fact, the poem is called September the 1st, 1939. Right. And contains the famous line, "We must love one another or die." And I think that's never been more true. I think that's what this young 16-year-old girl is telling us. If we can't love ourselves and our world, etc., we will die.
Right. If there's not the sense of empathy that we all have.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm reluctant to become a 60s hippie. And at which I was once, and to say that all you need is love. Because you need other things than love. You need, for example, money. So I'm not completely naive, but it is true that the quest for love, even impossible, improbable love,
which is the central part of this book,
is at the heart of it. That if you don't have that desire in your life, you got nothing. And maybe, and Quichotte keeps saying as a kind of refrain in the book, he says, love will find a way.
Right.
And it maybe that's true. Maybe that's true.
Well, and then you also, which was stunning to me, and knowing that you wrote this when you wrote it, you were able to really explain in such detail the whole problem that we're having with opioids right now.
Yeah.
And what's going on there, even to the point of, one of the characters is Smile,
Yes,
right?
Dr. Smile.
Dr. Smile.
He's an evil bastard.
He's an evil opioid dealer in a sense, or a pharmaceutical guy. But it very reminiscent of the Stadler group.
Sacklers, yeah.
The Sacklers, I mean, right.
Yeah, no, what happened is, okay, there's a sad part of this, which I'll just say to you, which is that 12 years ago, my youngest sister died of what was clearly opioid overdose. She was only 45 years old. And she was living in Karachi, Pakistan, so very far away. And what can happen, you know, in a kind of diaspora family is that because the distances are so great, you lose touch with the dailiness of people's lives. You know? So I had no idea. I had no idea that she was so dependent on these things. And then after she passed away, you know, her bathroom cabinet was like a pharmacy. It was all like a Percocet and Vicodin and Oxy and all these things. And of course I felt terrible because I felt, you know, she's my sister. I should have, and I'm her older brother, and I should have known. And so it became personal. And I started digging into it way back then. This is 12 years ago. And so, I mean, I had found out quite a lot about Johnson & Johnson and the Sacklers and all this, you know, quite a while ago. And for a long time, I felt that the thing that was worrying about this was it was this invisible epidemic. You know, that people were dying all over the place, and there was almost nothing being said about it. Now of course, it's slightly different. And then I thought, I found this story of this Indian doctor who was a crook, an Indian-American doctor who, in my novel, there's an Indian-American doctor who's a crook, and his pharmaceutical business is based in the Atlanta area, but the real person from whom I took the story was more in the Chicago area. Anyway, there's a man called John Kapoor, and his company invented this very powerful opioid which was a fentanyl spray.
It was a lingual.
Yeah, it was, you spray it under your tongue, and by spraying it under your tongue gets into your system faster. So and it was designed for a perfectly decent medical function, which was to relieve pain in terminal cancer patients. And for that, it's valuable. But because he wasn't content with that, he started paying sums of money to doctors across America to prescribe it what's called off-label, which means for things that it's not intended to be prescribed for, including recreational use. And in order to persuade the doctors, he hired a sales force out of strip clubs. A sales force was hired entirely on the basis of its sexual attractiveness, both male and female, by the way. And he would send these gorgeous salespeople out to do like lap dances for doctors. And then they would sign up. Sure, where do I sign? And it was something you couldn't, you can't make it up. The doctors in their surgeries get visited by lap dancing salespeople who also offer them substantial checks. And the checks, while substantial, were not life-changing. I mean, they were like $30,000, $40,000, which is fine. It's a nice check, but it doesn't change your life. It doesn't buy you a villa in the south of France. It doesn't buy you a Ferrari. And so I realized that for some people, at least, the price of their integrity is quite low. That integrity is quite cheap. So that was another discovery. And then the final thing was I thought, but why is this happening? Why is it happening? And then I thought it has something to do with loneliness. I mean, my sister, for example, was at that point in her life, her marriage had broken up and she was depressed and alone. And I thought maybe we've created this society in which, in theory, we have 100 ways of being in touch with each other every day. And actually, we're maybe more isolated than we ever were. And the subject of loneliness and depression, it seemed to me, was the subject through which I could understand this epidemic. Anyway, so that's in the book too. That's the bit that's not so funny.
Well, which leads me as well to me, some of the most poignant scenes in the book are the relationships between the brothers and sisters in the book as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, not only because of this family tragedy, but just in general, the subject of family has always been very close to the center of much of what I've written. And in this book, I wanted to talk about love, which was not necessarily romantic love. Let's say romantic love in the novel is represented by Quichotte's comic obsession with Salma R. Which, by the way, doesn't work out the way you think it will. But other kinds of loving relationships, parents and children, brothers and sisters, that I thought was quite near the emotional heart of the book. So in both the storylines, both of the Quichotte storyline and of his ostensible author, they're both in the middle of family crises involving both things, generational things, parents and children, but also sibling crises. And so the subject of if you can heal things that are broken, and if there are things that are forgivable, or are there things which are unforgivable, that's one of the questions in the book. And actually, I wrote about it once before. Like in the Satanic Verses, there's a small passage which is a story. It's not even a page, I think. Which is a story that one character tells another character, and the story is about a man and a woman who are friends. They've never had any kind of romantic relationship, but they're good friends. And the man gives the woman, as a token of their friendship, he gives her a hideous little glass vase. Has no value and it looks awful. But it represents their friendship. And then they have a fight. And in the middle of the fight, she picks up the vase and smashes it. And they never talk to each other again. And then time passes and she's dying. And she sends a friend as a messenger to the guy. And he says, the only person in the world she wants to see is you, and will you come? And he says she should have thought about that before she broke the vase. So now the question is, which side of that story are you on?
Right.
That I would suspect that most of us would feel that he was wrong,
right,
and that forgiveness trumps everything, but the question is, are there things that you can't forgive? Well, are there things that we do to each other, big or little, symbolic or actual? I mean, breaking a vase is clearly a symbolic act, but are there things that we do to each other which we cannot forgive?
And that plays out in this
and
novel.
That plays out in the story.
You have some really stunning things that happen to some of these characters.
Yeah.
But another thing that I found really appealing was the nostalgia, the looking back. You have Quichotte and the author, and just by chance, you as well, are also from the same neighborhood in Bombay, if I'm not mistaken.
The same tiny neighborhood, like 12 houses, on a hill where I grew up, and where both the author that I invented and the character that he invents, we all come from there. And by the way, I've written about it before, because in Midnight's Children, that's where Salim and his family grow up, except that in Midnight's Children, I fictionalized it. I changed the names of all the buildings and the neighborhood. I fictionalized it. This time I thought, you know what, I'm not going to fictionalize it.
No, in fact, the names are there. You can go to Google Earth.
Yes, you go to Google Earth and you find them. You find them. No, there was this guy who was a property developer in Bombay in the years just before the end of the British Empire. And he was Indian, but he was very Anglophile. So he built all these houses and he gave them comical British names. He named them after palaces. So there was the house I grew up in was called Windsor Villa. And next door to it, there was Sandringham Villa. And then there was Balmoral, etc. And then he kind of ran out of palaces. So he had to think of other British things. So there was a house that he called Christmas Eve.
That's great.
And anyway, I grew up in this crazy little group of houses. And both of them do. And back then, in the 50s, that was the heart of Bombay, that area, what was then called Bombay. Now the city has grown so much and grown away to the north that the center of the weight of the city has shifted, away from this area, which now feels almost like a nostalgic remnant,
right? But this was a way for you to revisit.
It was a way for me to say about these characters that that's where they come from. That's the thing. That's like the origin point. And it's also my origin point. And then it might also be a kind of farewell, because that India doesn't exist anymore. Right. That city is not like it used to be. And these people have left that city very, very long ago.
Including you.
Including me, and their lives have been elsewhere. And so, although that's the point of origin, it's also, it's a long time ago. It's way, way in the past, and although it means a lot, it doesn't determine your life anymore. And so I thought also that this faction, because these characters, almost all the characters in the novel, are immigrants. They're mostly Indian American, but one or two others. And I wanted to talk about that, with the effect of migration on the migrant, and a part of that has to do with what you leave behind.
Right.
And a part of it has to do with how you accommodate yourself to where you arrive. And so both those things, are part of it.
To change tacks a little bit, what's throughout the novel as well is clearly your interest in science fiction too. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I started off with science fiction. I mean, my very first much despised novel, Grimus, is a sort of science fiction novel. And it's because I had been a huge consumer of science fiction, as a young person. So it felt natural to me to go in that direction. And strangely, with that book, almost everybody hated it, except Ursula K. Le Guin, who loved it and wrote a kind of rave review of it. And I've always loved her ever since. And especially as she was a writer that I had loved anyway, so to see her getting it, meant something. Science fiction is a great form for the exploration of ideas. And
who are some of the readers that, writers that you would recommend?
There's two levels of science fiction. There's like kind of literary science fiction, and then there's hardcore science fiction.
Right.
So literary science fiction is like Kurt Vonnegut, Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Ursula Le Guin, Philip K. Dick, etc. But then there's the real thing, where the real aficionados go. There are these magazines which I used to read on very cheap paper. There was a magazine called Galaxy. That was a big science fiction magazine. There's a magazine called Astounding. And then in small letters, science fiction. Yeah. So theoretically, it's called Astounding Science Fiction, but actually Astounding is very big. There's another magazine called Amazing. And in those magazines, you read the hardcore stuff, where there are these people with wonderful names. Clifford D. Simak.
Oh, sure.
James Blish.
Where would you put Jose Philip Farmer? Would he be
Jose
part of that?
Philip Farmer, yes, who ghost wrote Paul and C.M. Kornbluth.
Right.
And L. Sprague, I always like L. Sprague de Camp. So that was a great name. I would have liked to have that name. Anyway, so I used to consume all this stuff. And two stories, short stories, one by Arthur Clarke and one by this writer, Catherine MacLean, who died recently, had just stuck in my head. And both of them became very helpful in this book. I mean, I can't exactly tell you why, because it would spoil the plot. But there's a story that Arthur C. Clarke wrote called The 9 Billion Names of God. And it's about a monastery in the Himalayas that approaches like IBM or some such thing and buys their biggest supercomputer. And nobody in the computer company can understand why these monks want this colossal machine. But anyway, they can afford it. And so these computer engineers go up to install this computer up in the mountains, you know. And eventually they say to one of them, they say, you know, what are you going to do with this machine? And the monk says, well, we're going to count the 9 billion names of God. And the monks, the computer engineers discuss this with each other and say, you know, but the machine can do that really quite fast. And then what will they do? So they might be a little bit pissed off once they've counted these names, and then they've got nothing more to do, and there's a really expensive machine. So they think, okay, well, let's just get it built, and then let's leave quickly. See, so, and eventually one of them says to the monks, what will you do once you've finished counting? Because the machine will, they say it'll take a couple of days to do that, and then it'll be done. And then what will you do with the rest of your lives? And the monks say, no, you don't understand. It's not just the purpose of our monastery to count the 9 billion names of God. It's the purpose of the universe. And therefore, once we have fulfilled the purpose, the universe will come to an end. That, obviously, because it will have fulfilled its purpose. And then they think, oh my God, now we're in real trouble. Because once we finish counting and the universe doesn't come to an end, they're going to be really angry. So they sneak off when they finished programming the computer. And they're in this plane flying home. And one says to the other, you know, probably about now, the machine's probably finished counting. And they look out of the window, and the last line of the story, it says, one by one, very quietly, the stars were going out.
Ooh.
And it's an extraordinary story.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it.
And you'll see if you read the book that there's a moment when that kind of idea is used, not exactly in the same way as Arthur Clarke, but it helped me. And Pictures Don't Lie is what we call in the trade a first contact story. You all know what a first contact story is? Yeah, anyway, first, you know, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Right.
The E.T. These are first contact stories, the moment at which the human race first encounters an alien species. And Pictures Don't Lie is a brilliant first contact story. And what it did, which I can't, it really will spoil the end of the book, is I was very worried about the end because of these two storylines. But I felt that for the book to be really satisfying, that at the final moment, or near the final moment, the storylines had to really merge. And the reader would think, oh, I see, they've kind of been the same story all along. You know, and I didn't know how to do it. And then out of nowhere, the story I hadn't read for 50 years popped back into my mind and told me how to end the book.
And we won't tell you how.
And we can't tell you that.
We're not going to tell you how it happens.
Because it's on the last page.
But you can tell by this conversation, you can just sense the richness and the diversity of what goes into this book.
It's an everything. You know, I think there are only two ways to write good books. One is to write an almost nothing book, where you take like one beautiful strand of story, and you kind of turn it in the light, and see what you can do with it. That works. That's, you know, Jane Austen, W.G. Sebald, right? Writers like that. Or you could try and write these everything books, which try to scoop up a huge amount of the world.
I love that. I'm going to create a new section in the bookstore called Everything Books, yeah. Because I think it's a really apt description.
Everything
of what
books
it is.
are like Charles Dickens.
Yes, of course.
You know, Saul Bellows' Augie Marsh.
Yes.
These are the books that Henry James called them loose, baggy monsters. But that's because he wasn't like that. I've always felt that I'm on the side of the everything books. This kind of encyclopedic urge to try and say, okay, let's talk about the whole of the world, not just this corner of it, but all of it. And the impossible thing is impossible to do.
You heard it here, the everything book.
The
that
everything
is
book.
The new categorization.
This is what I've been trying to do my whole life, is to write the everything book.
And Quichotte is that. And for those who haven't read it, you're in for a gigantic treat. But before we go to the audience questions, I want to really change the subject a little bit, because one of the things that I have always appreciated Salman Rushdie's voice, or when he lends his voice to anything having to do with free expression, and he was the head of PEN for a long, long time, and what he's done for all of us as readers has been quite remarkable. And I just want to get your sense, if I can. I'm going to give a little commercial too. Tomorrow night, he's going to be on Bill Maher as well. So one of the things I'd like to do is get your sense of what the hell is going on now in the world. What is happening?
I mean, meltdown. I hope.
Because it's happening here, it's happening in England, it's happening all over.
But when you look at these monsters we've elected, they both. Whether it's the horrible Boris Johnson, the classic, the definition of the upper class jerk, the old Etonian bully and creep.
Did you tell me that his sister has a story?
Yeah, his sister's in the paper today denouncing him. His brother denounced him last week. It's a good family. But both of them, whether it's Trump or Johnson, seem to be melting down before our eyes. They seem to be in a state of hysteria. In the case of Trump, it's quite pleasing to watch. I don't know what's going to happen. The thing that worries me about I'm very glad about the impeachment, because I think, about time. If they can't make it stick, he will win re-election. Yeah. So this is a kind of very, very high stakes gamble.
Right.
If they can make it stick, then the world might change in a better direction. We might have to put up with 8 or 9 months of Mike Pence, but I'll take it. Because I think one of the things that Mike Pence is not is electable.
I would agree.
So if we have to have a kind of interregnum of this man who can't be alone in the room with a woman, unless his wife has to be there.
Right. He could be in your book somewhere, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, but it really is, we're on a kind of hinge moment.
Right.
If they can, obviously the Senate will not go the way that the House goes. But the question is public opinion.
Well, and then from your perch as former head of PEN, what do you see happening in terms of literature? What is the health of that? And
well,
I see it as as a bookseller, I see the diversity is more than ever before.
Exactly. I think actually, never mind Trump and all that.
Right.
I think this is a really exciting time in American literature. And the excitement comes from two groups who have traditionally been marginal. One is people of color, and the other is new immigrants. So on the one hand, you have this extraordinary tidal wave of brilliant black writers. whether it's Jessamine Ward or Ta-Nehisi Coates or Tracy K. Smith or Natasha Trethewey or, in every field, whether it's poetry or theater or nonfiction or fiction, there are younger black writers redefining the American novel. Many of them, in their own opinion, the children of Toni Morrison. And I think that's, why her death recently unleashed such an extraordinary amount of grief.
Yeah, we had an event where we showed the Toni Morrison documentary.
With Timothy Greenfield Sanders' film.
And Edwidge Danticat spoke before it.
Yes.
And you could just sense how meaningful she was.
Yeah, she was everyone's mother.
Right.
And literary mother, but so there's that. And then there's this other phenomenon. American literature has always had a very strong immigrant dimension, but historically that was either Eastern European Jewish immigration, Isaac Bashevis Singer, and the kind of whole Bellow, Roth, Malamud, Mailer, etc. But now there's American immigrants from everywhere.
The Caribbean.
There's just if you look at who won the MacArthur Awards the other day,
right.
Ocean Vuong,
right.
Vietnamese American. You have Jhumpa Lahiri, South Asian American. Junot Diaz, who's from the Dominican Republic, right. and the list is very long. These people coming, seeing themselves as American writers, bringing into American literature not only the stories of other parts of the world, but the storytelling traditions of other parts of the world, the ways of telling, it's transformative. I think
I would agree completely.
And it's exciting to watch. And I find I've been living here 20 years now, and I've been a citizen for a few years. I became a citizen in time to vote in 2016.
Yay!
Yeah, that went well,
But you're in New York.
Yeah,
so
but
it doesn't matter.
In New York, where 85.
Why don't you move to Miami?
85% of us voted against Trump. But what I'm saying is that I felt, looking at this phenomenon, I thought, well, that's me too. I'm from somewhere else. I'm not white Caucasian, and I can bring, as an older writer, some of that same sensibility. And I think it's very exciting in a way to be inspired by writers much younger than yourself. Tommy Orange,
right?
These people. I met Tommy Orange. I tell you a sweet Tommy Orange story. I was at the National Book Awards when he won.
He's the author of There.
He wrote There. He's Native American, brilliant young writer. And I can't. Anyway, we went out for a drink afterwards, a group of us, and Tommy, he just won. Maybe had just a tiny little bit too much to drink, and there was a moment when he sat next to me with his head on my shoulder. And talked about loving me. I thought, go home, kid.
It's like Sancho.
It was sort of
a little bit like that.
It was sort of like that. But I think it's delightful to look at this huge burst of talent coming out of American literature.
It's astonishing to see.
I'm glad you see that too as a bookseller, because
people are buying their books and reading their books, and people are discussing them. It's a very, very exciting time.
Yeah, and actually, it has nothing to do with the politics of the moment.
Right.
I think in a separate part of the forest, there's a lot of us wondering how to respond to the insanity of the moment. And I guess this book is a little bit an attempt to do that. And what I think is that when the world gets this strange, the novel has to decide how strange it has to become in order to represent that world.
Right.
You know, and so it is pretty strange, this book. In fact, it's so strange that, you know, normally when I'm writing, I don't show it to I don't show anybody, you know, because I think work in progress is very fragile, you know, and if you show somebody something that you know isn't there yet, and they say, well, it isn't there yet, then it upsets you. So I wait till I feel I've finished. But this time, this book is so odd, particularly with the 2 storylines and all that when I'd written about 60 or 70 pages of a first version of it, I took a deep breath and I asked my legendary, ferocious agent, Andrew Wiley, to have a look at it. And I said, Andrew, look, don't tell me it's weird. I know it's weird. I said, you have to tell me if it's good weird or bad weird, because I'm not sure. No. And Andrew has the excellent quality of being ruthlessly honest. You know, he's an awful liar. So if he's trying to bullshit you, you could see he's bullshitting you. You know, so I thought, at least I'm going to get a straight read. You know, so I gave it to him, and he called me back, and he said, well, he said, there's not enough of it here. I can't tell where you're going with this. You could go in a number of directions, and I'm not sure what that is. He said, what I can tell you with the pages I'm looking at, he said, I think it's the funniest thing you've ever written. And I thought, oh, well, that's comforting. Funny is good. Because my general view is that if you can make people laugh, you can tell them anything. You know, and also that it's harder to make people laugh than to make them cry.
Oh, most definitely.
You know.
And this is extremely funny.
So it's a novel about the end of the world that's a comedy.
Right. And the other, true. And I just have to say one last thing before we take questions, is that a mutual friend of ours who is Salman's editor just recently died.
Yeah.
And her name is Susan Kamell. And I just want to recognize her here tonight.
For sure, because she was the head of Random House. She was the editor of so many of us who depended on her opinion.
It was you, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Thea Obrecht, Elizabeth Strout, any number of people. We're just talking about this publishing season. That's just one publishing season. You know, she was a genius editor, and also kind of like the nicest human being you'll ever meet.
Absolutely.
And she was, I mean, I saw when her obituary was published in the Times that they had a photograph of me and her.
Right.
And I thought, we're looking very young in this picture. And I looked at it, it was 12 years ago. Right. You know, so that's 4 or 5 books. I mean, we worked together for a long time, and I didn't always agree with her, but I always thought that her reading was so smart that I would have to think very seriously about everything she said.
She was one of the greats, and a huge loss to American
she came with this
culture.
book. No, this is not just your editor. This is the woman running the publishing company. She had amazing pressure on her time. And yet for her writers, she would make infinite time. So with this book, she read it like 4 times. And then she came over, and she sat with me across my desk from me for 6.5 hours.
Wow.
And we went through it literally page by page. And then she sent me her marked up manuscript, which was always a problem because she would mark up her manuscript in pencil, which was quite faint pencil. And her handwriting was borderline illegible. Right? So you could hardly see it on the page, and when you could see it, you couldn't read it. So I would have to literally use a magnifying glass in order to see what the hell these words were. You know? But anyway, so she would do that for all of us.
That's remarkable.
She would do that for all of us, and she would make infinite time. Whenever you needed her, she would be there.
That's a kind of editing that's just not done as much.
No,
anymore.
she's one of the last. I mean, somebody said in her after she died that her death represents the end of a certain generation of publishing.
Right.
You know, the last of the great old school editors.
So I think it's proper that we sort of dedicate this evening to Susan Kamell.
I would like very much to do that, and she was one of the special people in the world of books.
So do we have some questions? I think there are some.
Okay,
we have some time for questions?
Are there mics, or will people stand up and shout?
I think she's got
Oh, on cards.
some
Okay.
just a few, because
Okay.
I think we talked a long time. Apropos of what we were talking about, do you think we might be living in a world that is beyond satire at this
Oh,
point?
yeah. No, a lot of people say this now, that you can't make it up because truth is stranger than fiction. And I mean, yeah, I mean, it does feel like that. How can you? I was having dinner with my friend Ian McEwan, and we were saying, if we were to propose to our publishers as a novel the plot of what has happened in the last 3 years, they would say, go away and think of something more plausible. You know, and like the implausible has now become normal. You know? So yeah, I get it that, but I actually think in times like this, the reason why comedy is so powerful is that it cuts deeper, if you could do it properly. And also, the people we're talking about, the people in power who are making the world this insane, they really don't like it. And that's a very good reason for doing it. You know, so when Stephen Colbert every night has his nightly go at Trump, you know that Trump is watching it steaming, you know. And the pleasure of thinking of Trump watching it and feeling in a really bad mood is a part of the pleasure of watching it. And I've felt for a long time, actually, since long before Trump, since, you know, those sweet people, the two Presidents Bush, those people that we remember with such nostalgia. that innocent old man, Dick Cheney. Seems so gentle and kindly now. But I remember even then being grateful for the comedians, being grateful to Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and people like Samantha Bee and so on, and thinking they are the ones getting to the truth of this in a way better than the daily newspapers,
No,
you know. And so I think, and I think that's still true. I think it's still true that satirists, comedians right now, are cutting deeper than political commentators. So I think there's still room for it.
If you weren't a writer, what profession would you have pursued?
I wanted to be an actor. When I was at college, I wanted to be an actor more than I wanted to be a writer. And I spent a lot of my time involved with student theatre, such as being a rhinoceros. You know.
Now, you were in a few films too, right?
Well, what's happened is, you know, I was brainy enough to realize that maybe this was not a good career move for me to be an actor, that maybe don't go that way. But it's always felt to me like a kind of unscratched itch. You know, so every so often somebody offers me a little thing, like a little moment in Bridget Jones's Diary or a little moment on Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I think I was actually, the most mysterious thing was that Helen Hunt, the great actress, when she was directing her first film, which she also starred in, a film called Then She Found Me. And I didn't know Helen Hunt. And she reached out to me and offered me the part of her gynecologist. So I have played Helen Hunt's gynecologist in a movie that also starred Colin Firth, Bette Midler, Matthew Broderick.
But none of them had such a good role. I don't know.
No, but I was the guy in the white coat. You know, if anybody needs an ultrasound, and the one thing that I was sad about that I didn't get to do was I got approached by what was then called the producers of what was called Untitled Will Ferrell NASCAR movie, which became Talladega Nights.
Right.
And they had this, I thought, very funny idea that they wanted one shot, just one shot, of the 3 most improbable NASCAR drivers in the world. In the full suit, with the helmet, walking towards the camera, slow motion, heat haze, Take My Breath Away on the soundtrack, you know. And they approached Julian Schnabel, Lou Reed, and me. And we all thought it was funny, because we all knew each other a little bit. We all wanted to do it. So we all said to them, yeah, we'll do it. But then the date they gave us, we couldn't do. And then we talked to each other. And we said, if you move the date by 3 days, we can all do it. And they couldn't move the date. And so they dropped the idea. And so I really wanted that. I wanted the shot of the slow motion, the heat, and you know, take my breath away on the soundtrack. I really wanted that shot, but I didn't get it. So yeah, I still have a kind of itch to do a little bit of it, but I'm wise enough to know that I shouldn't, like, bet the house on it.
It's a good thing you don't have to.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing worked out.
Here's someone from the audience wants to know, did you have a mentor or a role model growing up?
As a writer? Not exactly, but there was this great Urdu language poet, Faiz Ahmad Faiz. Urdu is a great language for poetry, and Faiz is one of the great 20th century poets. And he was a very, very close family friend. He was like my aunt's closest friend. And I literally sat on his knee as a little kid. And he was an interesting writer in that he was two things. He was, on the one hand, a great writer of love poetry, although the love poetry was always a little kind of jaundiced. I'm not sure I would have liked to have been the recipient of one of his love poems, because they always seemed to find things wrong with the beloved. But he was also a political writer, and he would take on the big historical subjects of the time, such as the partition of India and Pakistan, and things like that. And I guess what I thought from him is, I thought, oh, well, that's kind of the job, that you have like private emotional art and you have a public political art, and you do both things. And I just assumed because of him that that's how it was. So I guess that was one mentor.
Is there someone today that you look to that is one of your good readers, or someone that you...
No, now I'm the old guy in the room. And what I actually do try and do is, I mean, I have a lot of very close relationships with writers of a generation or two younger than me.
With younger writers.
And they seem to find that valuable, and I think I love it, because it means I get to hear how...
Well, I would say that I think that's extremely valuable. And as a bookseller, the thing that I like to see happen is younger writers understanding the shoulders that they stand on.
Yeah, because that's what it is, this thing.
It
we
is
all stand on people's shoulders.
Right.
Literature comes, of course it comes from the writer's life and his own imagination and so on, but it also comes from other books. And every book in the world comes from other books.
Right.
And what you hope, because I know, Cervantes, for example, I know how much my work has learned from writers who came before me, and how much I benefited from the geniuses of the past.
Well,
and then you just hope that maybe a little bit of what you're doing is useful to other people.
Well, I think I can speak for everybody in this room when we say that we have all benefited from what you do.
Thank
you.
I
want to thank you for an amazing evening.
Thank you.
And thank you for writing such a spectacular book. Salman Rushdie.